So, picture this. It's the 20th century, and the whole world is changing. All across the globe, nations are trying to break free from colonial rule. The goal was the same for everyone, independence. But how they did it? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Let's dive in.
Seriously, how do you even begin to dismantle an empire? It's a huge question, right? Imagine, you're living under foreign rule. What's your move? What's the game plan? This was the massive challenge that millions of people were staring down. And here's the thing, there wasn't just one answer. There was no magic formula. It was more like a toolbox. A toolbox packed with all sorts of different ideas and strategies. So today, we're going to open up that toolbox and take a look at the tools that literally remade the modern world. All right, first up, let's look at the tools that weren't about weapons or armies. Nope, these were all about something maybe even more powerful, moral pressure. This was all about winning the battle for hearts and minds. So, the first tool we're pulling out is civil disobedience. And this is a really powerful idea. It's not about just sitting back and doing nothing. It's the exact opposite. It's active but peaceful resistance. The whole point is to openly break laws you think are totally unjust, but to do it without violence, to basically shine a giant spotlight on how broken the system is. And you can't talk about civil disobedience without talking about Mohandas Gandhi in India, right? He was the master of this. He organized these huge nonviolent campaigns. Think boycotting British stuff, massive protest marches, and of course the famous Salt March. Every single one of these actions was designed to squeeze the British Empire both morally and financially.
This quote really nails the whole philosophy behind it. You're not trying to fight fire with fire. Instead, you're using peace to show everyone just how violent and unjust the system already is. You're forcing the world, and even the oppressors themselves, to look in the mirror. Okay, another really fascinating tool in this moral category is something called liberation theology. Now, this was a pretty radical idea for its time. It basically said that your faith, your religion, isn't just about praying. It actually requires you to get in the ring and fight against oppression. And this idea absolutely took off, especially in places like Latin America. You had priests and other religious leaders telling people that helping the poor and fighting for justice wasn't just a political thing, it was a spiritual duty. And when you mix faith with activism like that, you get these incredibly powerful movements bubbling up from the ground level, all focused on social and economic justice. All right, so we've talked about the moral high ground. Now let's switch gears and look at a different part of the toolbox. These tools were all about answering a super practical political question. Okay, once we're free, what's the relationship with the old empire going to look like? And believe me, the answers were all over the map. It really boiled down to two main paths. On one hand, you had autonomy. That's where the goal was to rule yourselves, but maybe stay connected to the empire in some way. Think negotiation, a gradual process. But on the other hand, you had separatism. And that was a demand for a clean, total break. No more ties. Let's start a brand new country from scratch. As you can imagine, that path often got messy. So autonomy wasn't always the final goal. Sometimes it was a strategic move, a stepping stone. A great example is India again. Before it became fully independent in 1947, they went through a period of having more and more self-rule. This was huge because it let their own leaders build up government institutions and get real experience in running things. It was like training wheels for full independence. Now, let's look at the flip side, separatism. And for this, you have to look at Algeria's fight for independence from France. It's a classic, intense example. For the Algerian separatists, there was zero interest in negotiation, zero interest in some kind of special relationship. For them, the only way forward was a clean, hard break. And that decision led to an incredibly long and brutal war. Okay, the last tool we're going to look at is really different from the others. Why? Because it wasn't about just one colony. This was an idea that crossed borders. It was a global vision that said, hey, maybe we're stronger together. And that idea is Pan-Africanism. It's this incredibly powerful belief that all people of African descent, whether they're on the continent or living elsewhere around the world, are connected. They share a history, they share a destiny. And their best shot at true freedom was to team up and present a united front against all the colonial powers. And one of the biggest champions of this idea was Kwame Nkrumah. He's the guy who led Ghana to independence, which was a huge deal, one of the first sub-Saharan African nations to break free.
But for him, it wasn't just about Ghana. His vision was way bigger. He wanted to light a fire that would inspire a united Africa, an entire continent pushing back against imperialism.
So there you have it. We've pulled a bunch of different tools out of this decolonization toolbox. So what's the big picture here? What's the main takeaway?
Well, you can see it all laid out right here. You've got the peaceful protests in India, the violent break-in in Algeria, faith-driven movements in Latin America, and this incredible vision of unity across Africa. The point is, there was no one-size-fits-all solution. Every single movement picked the tools from the toolbox that made the most sense for them.
And this is so important to understand. These weren't just some dusty old political theories. No way. These were the actual blueprints that people used to tear down massive global empires. And then, with those same tools, they built the dozens of new countries that make up the world we live in today. The world map looks the way it does because of these ideas.
So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. If those were the game-changing ideas that shaped the entire 20th century, what are the big ideas shaping our world right now? What are the tools in our modern toolbox that are building or maybe even breaking down the world of tomorrow?